Good evening, members, and good evening to those watching on our YouTube channel. This is the meeting of the Braintree District Council Planning Committee for today, the 7th of May. And I'll steam straight into the agenda and call for any apologies for absence. The ones I have are Councillor James Abbott, Councillor Anne Hooks and Councillor Iona Parker, who this evening is being substituted by Councillor George Prime. Councillor Paul Thorogood is also not here, and we don't in reality have a substitute. Are there any other apologies? Thank you very much. Item 2, declarations of interest. To declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest, if I can pronounce it, or non-pecuniary interest relating to the items on the agenda, having regard to the Code of Conduct, which of course is the new one, for members, and having taken appropriate advice where necessary before the meeting. None. Thank you. Item 3. Minutes of the last meeting. You have had those minutes.
Mr. Chairman, they're not
They haven't?
yet. No, they'll go to the next meeting.
Oh, right. Okay. You haven't had those minutes, so they will be dealt with at the next meeting. Getting ahead of myself. Item 4, public question time. This is general question time. There are no members of the public registered to address us this evening, and the application-specific presentations from members of the public will take place at the appropriate point in our proceedings. And our proceedings therefore go to item 5, planning applications. And application 5A on our agenda is application number 22-03366 OUT, Halstead Hall, Braintree Road, Greenstead Green. And we have no speaker, and the officer who's going to present to us this evening is Chris Paggy. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. So, members, the first application before you this evening will be very familiar with the site. It's land adjacent to Halstead Hall off Braintree Road, technically within the parish of Greenstead Green, but on the edge of Halstead. The application is in outline form with all matters reserved apart from access and layout for the erection of 34 new dwellings, which would include 24 market units and 10 affordable units. I'll just take you through the submitted plans to start with. So starting off with the location plan, members will see the site outlined in red. You'll be able to make out at the bottom of the plan, you've got Russell Road there coming off of Braintree Road, and then the start of Mount Hill running into the town of Halstead, down the hill, and you'll note the new development on the right-hand side of that, and the existing complex of Halstead Hall. Just a bit of an aerial context as well, just to show the site, and also to underline some of the sort of the character of the wider area. You'll see sort of quite a large amount of trees within the vicinity of the site and on the edge and perimeters of the application site. Again, you can see the existing buildings at Howard Hall, and you'll be able to make out in the bottom left corner the rectangular area, which is the benefit of permission as well for residential development. So in terms of the submitted site plan, access and layout are matters for consideration. So this shows the proposed layout of the development coming in off of Mount Hill in terms of the main access, and you'll see the main spine access coming through the site with residential off of it, and then forking off to the flatter development over on one side, and then an additional residential area further in the corner. In terms of the interrelationship, so as I mentioned, on the bottom half of that screen, there's a separate permission in place for residential development. Members recently considered a revised application, which was refused essentially on design and layout grounds in relation to that site. But that site does have the benefit of an extant permission. To the north, on the shaded area, and you'll see sort of a peachy colour, there's also a consent in place for that area of land on the right-hand side. But critically, and I'll flip over to the parameter plan for that in a second, but critically, what this proposal would do is effectively extend residential development past that sort of built line effectively, further into the sort of the area of countryside and the rural part of this approach into Housestead. So the parameter plan for the adjacent site in slightly more detail. So our application site here is to the left-hand side. That sort of darker beige shaded area is effectively the parameter plan for the built development as part of that approved scheme for up to 55 new dwellings. The green area at the top was prohibited and was not included as part of the built area for development. And as I said, the proposed scheme is to the left-hand side and effectively would breach that area of development. Just a couple of street scene elevations. So as approaching and through the site, you can see the three-storey indicative scale of flats in one particular corner. Some photos of the site. So entrance from Braintree Road. Again, very much highlighting the character here in terms of the number of established trees, the sort of the rural context of the site. And then the bottom right-hand corner, obviously, from within the site itself. Again, some further photographs around the northeast boundary, again indicating quite heavily the amount of established trees, which is obviously one of our areas of concern. And again, on the southwest portion of the site. And the northern, so this is effectively where the additional area of residential is also proposed. And a view from public right-of-way. So, in terms of policy context for the application, so as I said, the application seeks outline consent for up to 34 homes. Access and layout are sought at this stage for approval. The starting point within the development plan is that this is a site which is not allocated for development in the local plan. It's beyond the settlement boundary as designated within the adopted local plan. So the site is designated as countryside, and obviously the starting point is that this is not a form of development that is compatible with the countryside. It's a speculative scheme, and therefore there is an objection in principle to the proposal. As with all schemes for speculative development, we do need to weigh up the benefits and also the adverse impacts from the development. So obviously there would be a contribution towards our housing supply situation and also for the provision of some affordable dwellings, albeit relatively low numbers. And obviously some economic development benefits both during construction and after occupation, but that is very much a standard benefit for this scale of scheme. And there could also be some further benefits in terms of B&G and so forth once a detailed scheme has been built out. But from an officer's perspective, we do consider that there are significant adverse impacts in relation to this proposal. So there is the conflict with the adopted local plan and the conflict with the settlement boundary. So the proposal is contrary to policy LPP1, and we say is contrary to the development plan as a whole. It would represent a further encroachment into the countryside, particularly that area to the north, which, unlike the site adjacent, would breach into a further area of countryside. We are concerned in this case about the impact on trees, and we've highlighted within the report that actually the proposal necessitates quite a high removal of a number of trees, and we're concerned that that can't be mitigated, and what we've seen in terms of the proposed layout is actually it's deficient in terms of its response and the requirement for tree planting. But as layout is also a matter which is sought for approval at this stage, we've also had to consider the layout of the development. And in this regard, we do have concerns that actually the quality of residential development here which would be delivered is not a level that we would deem to be acceptable in terms of the amenities for future occupiers, but also in terms of sort of garden layout and its proximity to the main road. And the application is also deficient in terms of some of its supporting information in relation to ecology. So we have an objection in that area as well. The application before you has now been subject to notification from the applicant that they have appealed against the non-determination of the application. So the local planning authority is no longer able to formally determine the application. So members this evening would effectively be outlining the position that we would adopt as part of the appeal process. So the officer position is that had we been in a position to make a decision on the application, the recommendation in this case would be for refusal on the basis that the harms of the application outweigh the benefits of the proposal, and we would say that the application is contrary to the development plan as a whole, and that there are no material considerations that indicate that a different decision should be taken in this particular case. So would recommend refusal. Happy to answer any questions, Chair, on the application. And yes, over to members.
Thank you very much, Chris. Okay, members. Right. Councillor Bowers-Flint.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I ask why this application has been with us since December 2022 and has only just come in front of us, please?
Chris.
Thank you, Councillor Bowers-Flint. So, as with all major applications, some take some time to consider. In this particular case, there has been some engagement with the applicant agent, and during the course of the application, there have been negotiations and discussions around the detailed layout. I've mentioned the other related applications on adjacent sites, and obviously that has factored into the consideration with how we've approached all of the various parcels and applications, and factored into consideration. We have had to get some quite detailed agricultural advice in relation to this specific proposal because of the impact on trees and because of the resourcing issues we've currently had within the relevant team. That's taken a lot longer to pull together. But we've also had to manage, obviously, the caseload of major applications and those applications that we've been wanting to support, and those like this particular application where we feel the balance firmly falls in favour of a refusal. So it has taken longer than normal to report the application, but as indicated in the report, once we'd indicated to the applicant agent that we were minded not to support the application at an officer level, that's effectively forced the appeal situation. So hopefully that provides a bit of context for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Beavis.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to Chris for his presentation. I would agree in terms of the trees, design layout and the adverse impact. I know the site well, as do many members around this table, and clearly it's not in the local plan. I just wondered if the applicant goes for appeal at the same time as we're going for call for sites, does that have any relevance at all? You know, if it's at appeal, can they still bring that? Because that's really where this site should sit. It should really come forward now in the call for sites. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Beavis, for the question. So obviously the application will be subject to an appeal, and that will follow its own process now through PINS, and the planning inspector will ultimately make a determination on whether or not the application should be granted or not. Separately to that, as part of a call for sites process, any landowner, developer can obviously put forward sites for the review of the local plan. So that could happen separately. I've got no indication. I'm not aware whether or not the applicant is considering putting this site forward, but that could be something that would that could happen in that scenario. But members, this evening, the determination that you need to make is your position on the application as it stands at the moment, and then obviously the appeal process will follow and come to a resolution as part of that. And then if the site was put forward as part of a call for sites, obviously a material consideration of that may well be the outcome of an appeal situation in relation to this proposal. So hopefully that provides some help and context.
Thank you very much. Councillor Spray.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, I always find it disappointing when an applicant goes to appeal before we've had a chance to discuss it. I appreciate this has been around a while, as Councillor Bowes-Flint pointed out, but, you know, there have, as Chris has said, been, I think, considerable conversations between officers and the applicant to try and resolve some of the problems. There has been a lot of toing and froing with statutory consultees. You know, we have the next application on the agenda tonight actually is also a 22 application and has been quite convoluted, but nevertheless, you know, that's here with us for a decision this evening. So, yeah, I think it's, you know, it's disappointing, but there we are. There are, I think, 4, you know, very solid reasons for refusal with this one this evening. I'm assuming that reason 4, which is around section 106, I'm assuming that that's still outstanding, not progressed. Yeah. Other than that, you know, the officer's view is there is not sufficient room on this site for the number of dwellings proposed. It's lacking information, a lot of environmental and ecological information. And it's a site we've had, I think this is the 2nd or 3rd application variation of that we've had for this site, and it's not met with approval at any time. So I won't move anything right at the moment, but I'm happy to do so when anybody else has had something to say. But I do think we've got very good reasons, had we been in a position to do so, to refuse this evening. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Spray. Councillor Finken.
Yeah, this is a very sensitive site at the gateway to Halstead, and it's really part of Halstead rather than Greenstead Green, I would say, even though it's theoretically part of Greenstead Green. And I think the setting of Atwoods is as important as the house itself. And the loss of the trees, the lawns and so on would certainly be detrimental, I think, to the impression that you get of the town as you come into it from Braintree. And I think for all the reasons that Mr Padgey has mentioned and the general disadvantages to the impression that you get when you come into the town, then I would be supporting the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Finken. Anybody else? Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Yeah, for everything that's been discussed amongst my planning colleagues this evening, I think we have more than enough grounds to decide with officers' recommendations this evening. Alongside the due diligence that we carry out as a planning authority, then every developer has their accountability too, and to bring a proposal forward that's short of the required information as well is a bit of a failing on their part as well. So I think we should be mindful when we're considering lengths of applications that have been in there. They've had more than enough time to work with officers to get to a point where maybe they realise that there's no viability in bringing a site forward, or as unfortunately we've got a case this evening, they don't wait for our decision and they take it to the planning inspectorate for them to cast a decision. How they'll decide on this, who knows? Who knows what inspector and who knows what book of knowledge they'll be using to see which way this falls. But we have strong representations from our own local planning authority this evening, and I'm happy to stand behind that decision. Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ritchie. Is there any other member that wishes to speak on this? Councillor Munday.
I don't think I have anything particularly new to add. I'd just like to say that I'm in full support of the comments from Councillor Ritchie, Councillor Finkin, Councillor Beavis and others that have spoken. This is an important site for Halstead. It is very visible as you come into Halstead. When you look through the very detailed report that we're looking at this evening, there just isn't anything I see as a positive for this site. There's just so many things that are not correct with the submission of this. You know, ecological loss, the fact that we've got such a lot of tree loss, poor noise environment, the car parking arrangements. That there just isn't really any way that you can look at this and not go along with the officer's recommendation of refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Monday. Councillor Schweer.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask a question, really sort of a technical comment, really, for about biodiversity net gain? It's been mentioned by not only yourself but several of the colleagues tonight about potential tree loss, but the point of the biodiversity net gain overall surely is also to potentially compensate for this, so that actually it seems rather odd to say that there will be, well, it will be a fact that there will be tree loss, but I think the point should be that actually it can be mitigated by the biodiversity net gain and substantially mitigated by applications like this. So would you just confirm that that is the reason as well, please?
Chris, please.
Thank you, Councillor Schweer, for the question. So obviously, given the age of the application, it predates the sort of mandatory requirements that have now come into force for major applications. But there would be an expectation, if this received planning permission, that there would be biodiversity net gain that would be achieved as part of a detailed reserve matters, if you like, on the site. So while that is achievable, I think what we would still argue from an arboricultural perspective, purely in relation to the trees, is actually still the impacts there are still significant. So you could effectively achieve some mitigation through B&G on the site with the amount of space that's available on the site, but that still wouldn't necessarily fully mitigate for the loss of the trees. And I think we also have concerns, obviously, with the layout in terms of how tree planting would then be accommodated within that. The ideal would be, obviously, you maximise the retention of trees on the site, you minimise the loss, and you then achieve that enhancement in addition to that. And I think the detailed proposal that we have, we've got some strong concerns about loss of trees, and this is one where, as officers, we do feel uncomfortable. Obviously, some schemes come before this committee where we have to accept as officers that our position is that there will be an element of tree loss, but we can't really argue against it to facilitate a new access or part of the development. I think in this particular case, I think there are some alternative choices that could be made. There are some alternatives here that could be followed to allow for a greater amount of tree retention on the actual site itself. And then obviously you've got the wider character arguments that were running in terms of that further incursion to the north. So there would still be the requirement for B&G that could still be achieved potentially through a reserve matters submission. But I think our position on this application is slightly different in the sense we're not saying that B&G is not achievable, and we recognise that could be a benefit, but actually the arboricultural impact here and the loss of the trees we feel is actually quite significant, and we have a separate concern about that. So hopefully that answers the question, Councillor Schweer.
Thank you very much. Councillor Diamond.
I had planned today to vote against officer recommendations. I am always very wary against voting against new homes, particularly when that is affordable accommodation. However, I am worried that actually, having listened to other members and the rather brilliant report given by the officer today, I feel that I can't do that because I feel that it's so poorly thought through, and the fact that they have seemed to be unwilling to work with officers has been over such a long time that I feel that I can't vote in favour of it. But I do vote in favour of officer I do vote in favour of officer recommendations with a heavy heart, because we do need more affordable housing around here. It's just a shame it can't be this particular development. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Diamond. If there's nobody else, we've had a couple of people suggest they'd like to move this. Councillor Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm happy to move officers' recommendation for refusal should we been in a position to do so.
Thank you, Councillor Spray, and seconded by Councillor Bowers-Flint. Councillors, you've heard the arguments, and you have the proposal to support officer recommendation, that if we were in a position to make this decision, we would make the decision we're about to make by voting. All of those in favour of supporting officer recommendation, please raise your hand. That, I believe, is unanimous. Thank you very much, councillors. This committee has voted to refuse that application. That being the case, we move to item 5B. On item 5B, we have a presentation from Matthew Warr, but preceding that, we have a speaker, Mr. Michael Smith, who I'd like to invite to the table before us. Mr. Smith, we've seen one another before, you know the game. You have 3 minutes to make your presentation.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to address the committee this evening. Members of this committee will recall the scheme was presented to the Planning Forum several times because the steep slope across the site has been a difficult issue to address and has been the focus of our discussions with the GACE officers. The southwestern corner of the site is 11 metres higher than the northeastern corner, and there is an area that runs diagonally across the land where the site slopes at a gradient of 1 in 10. This is too steep for access by someone using a wheelchair or a walking aid, and it's beyond the maximum that Essex County Council would accept for a road, so it simply isn't possible to build on the existing ground. The Planning Forum was presented with draft options for works to regrade the site, ranging from digging out the land to a depth of 3 metres below the existing ground, to a scheme that flattened the gradient by raising the land by 2.5 metres. These options have been discussed with the officers, the drainage and highways teams at the County Council, and most importantly, with the neighbours to the site. The final version, which we presented to you tonight, seeks to strike a balance between managing the ground levels and delivering a scheme that protects the amenity of the houses that surround the site. There will be cutting and filling to even out the gradient, with each north-south street standing above the one to the side, so that the steps where the levels are changed are hidden from view behind the new homes. In addition, where neighbours in Gilder Terrace raised concerns because of the perception of being overlooked by the new homes on the higher ground, we moved the new homes further from the boundary, we placed bungalows at the highest point, we introduced taller fences and added a tree belt to block the views. Away from the focus on the ground levels, the proposed scheme delivers 120 new homes using traditional building forms and materials, including pitch roofs, projecting porches and combinations of brickwork, boarding and render. The site marks the edge of the built-up area of the town and faces outwards to a landscape buffer that will create a transition into the surrounding countryside, with the provision of public open space on the south side to ensure that the new homes are set away from Flitch Way and that the path retains its rural character. The scheme meets, and where it can, exceeds the District Council standards and the standards set by central government. These range from car parking and the space within the rear gardens to tree-lined streets and compliance with the nationally described space standards. Every new home will take a fabric-first approach to reducing energy demand. They will all be equipped with photovoltaic panels, all will be provided with electric vehicle charging points, and the landscaping scheme secures a biodiversity net gain of nearly 30% for habitat and over 160% for hedgerows. Crest Nicholson would like to thank officers, councillors and the engagement received from the public, which has ultimately led to them being able to create a scheme that is presented to you tonight with a recommendation for approval from the officers. The scheme to address the reserve matters has been designed to address some awkward technical issues, but the focus has always been on the creation of a high quality, aspirational, beautiful place where families can live happily and safely. As such, I trust you will concur with the case officer's recommendation and resolve to approve the reserve matters.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Time for perfection. Okay, let's move to our officer's presentation. And tonight that will be done for us by Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So, as you've heard at public question time, the site we're talking about this evening is land rear of Gilder Terrace on Rain Road. It's for the approval of reserve matters in respect of layout, scale, appearance and landscaping for the erection of 120 dwellings, including works to ground levels. And this is, of course, pursuant to the outline planning permission, which was granted on appeal, which allowed for up to 120 dwellings. and included details of access for approval and the demolition of number 27 and 29 Gilder Terrace. So I'll take you to the red line plan first. So the site is about 4.95 hectares. The standout thing you'll see is the sort of crooked finger I should say, of the land, which essentially is for drainage purposes. It goes into the River Brain. The other notable thing as well is that there's the standoff between the Flitchway, which runs along the southern boundary, and the actual red line site. And I believe that was deliberate at the application stage, at the outline stage, to allow a buffer to be created, which I'll show you. Aerial plans show the site context the best in terms of surroundings. So we've got the Gilder Terrace development here. So that fronts onto Rain Road and backs onto the site. And you've noticed that it's also got a sort of rear access track at the back as well, which predominantly is accessed from this point here, but can also be accessed over here as well. And you've got the Springfield and Sunlido development to the east. The River Brain, as you can see, sort of runs along here. And then you've got the Flitchway as well, as I said. And then this sort of parcel here is outside the red line boundary of the site. What the aerial plan isn't showing is the levels, which members will be well aware, but I'll talk you through it anyway. So the red lines on this topographical plan indicate where there's a change in levels of 1 metre, and where the levels are closer together there is a steeper level change. And as you can see, that's really concentrated on this sort of section of the site. So the site slopes up in a sort of south-westerly direction. The steepest part of it has a gradient of 1 in 10. So for every 10 metres of forward travel, there would be 1 metre in terms of the level change. And before I take you to the plans, I want to take you just some of the site photos just to sort of show you that gradient really. So you've got this, and I've also tried to include a plan. You might not be able to see it, but it just at the bottom, which shows where the picture is taken. So this picture is looking along the rear access, Gilder Terrace on the right and the site on the left. And again, looking in the opposite direction, looking towards where the town of Braintree, Gilder Terrace on the left and the site on the right, and then you've got Sunlido down over there. And then this is looking sort of southwards towards, you've got Sunlido on the left-hand side, and then the Flitchway up here, and the site on here. And then just looking back at the existing access point, the outline consent allow for the demolition of these 2 houses as well. So they'll go throughout, the access will become wider as per the approved plans, and then that will also retain the access, the rear access for those properties on Gilder Terrace as well. This is so looking in the corner of the site, sort of in just as you come onto the site, looking at some of those relationships where you've got sort of the windows, the backing on to the the site, some of the sort of more obscure angles that these houses were put at, and you can also see an established tree and vegetation belt that's there already. And again, just sort of moving sort of the opposite end of the site, looking just through that tree belt, if you like. This is taken in mid-December, so as you can see, there is not many leaves on the trees. And then I've taken one more recently, about a year later actually, looking back towards Gilder Terrace, and you can begin to see the slope, that south-westerly slope upwards on the left-hand side. This shot is just taken just a bit further over, looking towards the Flitchway up there. The later pictures have the actual site marked out, with the Harris fencing. So the Flitchway is on the right, the site's on the left. So that gap that I was referring to earlier, that is this gap essentially where I'm taking the photo. Again, this is looking northwards back towards Gilder Terrace, and you can see where the site is marked out, and this sort of bit of land that I said that was outside the red line. A photo sort of from, I suppose, from sort of top part of the hill, which sort of looks across the site, looking back down at Gilder Terrace. You can see obviously the slope, and there's a few more photos really that just show the same thing really. Just give an indication of that slope that we're working with on this site. Again, looking up towards the Flitchway from the sort of down rear Gilder Terrace at the top part of the site. And this is just a photo from the Flitchway that I took as well, just looking at views from the Flitchway to the site. Okay, so the approved parameter plan is what you're looking at now. This was from the outline stage. So the yellow is where the approved access is from Rame Road. The legend obviously is on the left-hand side. You might not be able to read it, so I'll just quickly summarise it. But the dark green is meant to be for strategic buffer to include access to the rear of those properties on Gilder Terrace. The green is the open space, which is to include a play area, informal open space and SUDs. The pink is residential development of up to 2 stories and associated paraphernalia, and the sort of darker brown colour is residential development of up to 2.5 stories with associated paraphernalia. So this is what the Reserve Matters has to comply with, and it is the Reserve Matters that's before you this evening is in broad accordance with the parameter plan, but there are some minor discrepancies. I set these out in detail on paragraph 11.12.1, page 80 of the committee report, so I won't go through them here, but I will just say that these discrepancies are why there's a resolution to include a section 73 application to be submitted to amend this approved parameter plan, just to essentially tally up with what is proposed now. So that's obviously land that has been, like green space that's been taken from the built form, but also some built form that's extended slightly into the green space. There's also, from the outline stage, an area of strategic landscaping which is outside of the red line. Bit of an odd one, to be honest. It's through condition 10, which we have to secure this buffer, and that's why we've asked for, one of the reasons we've asked for a legal agreement to accompany the Reserve Matters to make sure we can essentially tie in this development to retaining that landscape buffer and obviously maintaining it. That might be able to come through as part of a Section 73 application when that is submitted, if members are minded to resolve to grant this evening. So it doesn't have to necessarily be through the Reserve Matters, but it is put forward at the moment on the Reserve Matters. Okay, so the development layout. So this is what's now proposed for approval. It's gone through several iterations since it was first submitted in December 2022. It's taken a significant amount of time through negotiations with officers to achieve a scheme which officers now consider to be acceptable. Part of the reason for the delay has been the challenging topography which has been talked about, and that there's been no defence given by the outline parameter plans. Obviously we're allowed on appeal to help with this, so obviously we've had to deal with the hand we've been dealt. So as existing, the site is too steep to provide new roads at suitable gradients, so the site can't be developed out by using existing ground levels. So as a starting point, groundworks are required to even out the slope and enlarge the gradient to essentially be shallower. As you'll see hopefully have seen in the committee report, it goes into a lot of detail about the proposed levels. I won't go through those full details in this presentation because I'll be talking all night. But I'll give some headlines and hopefully some helpful illustrations. So the development as currently proposed wouldn't require any salt to be exported off-site or any of a significant amount, unlike some of the other cut options which were considered previously. The main sort of ground raising would be in this part of the site, behind Gilded Terrace. This is around 1 metre. And this is obviously to allow, as I said, the road gradient to sort of catch up, if you like, with the level on this top part of the site. So if the road had been too steep, this stayed the same, this level, and that the road would not have been able to get up to this point, to these houses, at an acceptable gradient. So that's where the issues come in, and that's why the need for the raise has arisen. The main sort of cut is the attenuation pond, the suds pond, essentially at the corner of the site. In terms of layout more generally, as you can see, we have the central spine road, so that picks up from the approved access, traversing north-south, so that helps with the levels, meeting the gradients of the levels. And then the level changes east-west are predominantly accommodating the gardens, so I'll show you that later. So yeah, predominantly just seeking to provide a back-to-back relationship with the existing development, so Gilded Terrace, and then also Sun Lido, Springfields over here as well. The rest of the development is a sort of grid format, so you're providing sort of new back-to-back relationships, having that frontage onto the streets, but also that frontage onto open space as well. The affordable housing, you might not be able to see it, is the blue dots. So there's a concentration of affordable housing here, a concentration over here, and a concentration over here. So there's sort of 3 distinct clusters of affordable housing. Actually, I do have some more actually on this slide. So the 2.5-storey dwellings are limited to the central spine road. I'll show you that later. The open space is to the south as per the approved parameter plan. A link will be provided to the Flitch Way. The site shows obviously where it would stop, and then the remaining link would need to be subject to a separate planning application which has been submitted just because it's outside the red line. The play space is this sort of orangey browny colour here. The development would comply with the Essex Design Guide garden standards, and officers have taken quite a long time to interrogate the layout to ensure that the garden fences are as straight as possible, to ensure they're built out as proposed, because sometimes if you get a odd garden, they don't always build it out as it's shown. So yeah, making sure that they do that as much as possible to achieve those garden sizes that they've said they can achieve, which is in accordance with the standards. Parking is in accordance with the standards as well. Visitors parking dispersed across the site. Tree-lined streets are proposed. You can see it differs depending on the street hierarchy, so the sort of more formal in the verge for the central spine. Then you have sort of more informal planting and other parts of the development. The trees will be in management company land. And we've had a management company plan be submitted, which is for approval, which shows where that would be. So that would ensure the longevity of the trees as per the the national policy requirement. There's also a substation shown at the top part of the site. It's not for approval this evening. I'll touch on it in the committee report. But essentially, the developer wanted to sort of highlight it that they are planning to bring one forward rather than it be a surprise later. So they'll have to submit a separate application for that substation at a later point. So essentially members can ignore that substation tonight for the purposes of the decision making. Okay, right, moving on. So plots 4 and 14 which are those here that back onto Gilder Terrace, numbers 71 to 31. Perhaps probably the most contentious part of the site, obviously, with the ground raising as proposed. What I have done is include a extract of the originally submitted application layout at the top versus what we're now looking at in terms of a proposal. So, as you can see, the perpendicular plots have been removed. The plots have also been moved back 5 metres, so you've lost that sort of parking area at the front, and you've got it more sort of side by side rather than sort of more informal parking arrangement. So it's got a formal parking arrangement. So that 5 metres allowed for a landscape buffer to be included, which, as I said earlier, was one of the discrepancies on the parameter plans from the outline. The plots 13 and 14 are bungalows because they sit on the highest part of the site. So obviously that's another thing where obviously the developers try to respond to the change in levels and the site to minimise the impact on the neighbours as far as possible. Okay, and then, so as I said, the committee report goes into a lot of detail about the relationship between the proposed development and the existing Gilder Terrace houses. Table 2 on page 67 sets out specific floor-to-floor height differences between the plots and the amount of ground raising required. I won't go through many examples, but just these two illustrations in front of you, I thought I'd just sort of indicate and show you what it would look like. So we've got plots 12 at the top and plot 4 down the bottom. So plot 12 is at the one of the higher points of the site, near the bungalows. Plot 4 is sort of closer towards the site entrance. So in the example of plot 4, there'd be 49 metres back-to-back distance. The ground raising, including the damp-proof course, would be 1.13 metres. So the overall difference in height would finish floor to floor would be 1.43 metres. So that obviously is taking into account the existing high level of the ground. And then plot 12, similarly, would have a 0.95 metre ground raise, including the damp-proof course, but would actually have a difference floor to floor. So the finished floor level here and the finished floor level here would be actually 2.6 metres, because, as I say, because of the way it is, where it is on the site topography. So I suppose it's probably important, by way of context, to think about what are the standards, existing standards that we normally work to for back-to-back distances. And we usually use the Essex Design Guide, and that says a minimum of 25 metres for 2-storey to 2-storey, and it ups that to 35 metres where you've got 3-storey with living accommodation on the first floor and 2-storey development. So obviously the back-to-back distance in this case obviously is nearly 50 metres with the where it's been moved. So obviously it's quite a lot larger than what we'd normally expect. As you can see, the gardens slope down towards the Gilder Terrace. So one of the things officers were concerned about was eye levels enclosure and perception of overlooking. So one of the things we asked the developer to include was an acoustic fence, which you can sort of see in that pink colour. So that acoustic fence is 2.4 metres high. So that obviously is higher than what we'd normally expect for a boundary treatment, but that should provide a visual block for anyone at eye level in the garden to not be able to essentially reduce the perception of overlooking onto those properties on Gilder Terrace. And then as well, one of the points I was to confirm was about the management of that acoustic fence, and it's since been confirmed that the acoustic fence will be within the management company land ownership. So the future residents of these plots won't be able to change the fence without the management company approval. So obviously it helps secure its longevity, and it also stops piecemeal replacement in the future. And then just a couple of CGIs that we also asked the developer to produce. So the top photo is from the site access looking along the existing access for Gilder Terrace here. Then you've got the strip of land which is where the easement runs, so you can't have any trees planted on this area, but what is proposed is to be managed by the management company, to have defensive planting in there, like brambles, for example, to try and prohibit or prevent public access. And obviously further afield you have the tree buffer, which you can see. And that's plot 1 for reference. And then sort of stepping back towards Rain Road a bit, so you can see plots 4 to 14, which obviously is what we've just been talking about, and that slope up relative to Gilder Terrace on the right-hand side. Obviously these are indicative, so take with a pinch of salt, but hopefully give you a flavour of what the relationship would be. So this top photo is looking at the less used access point for the Gilder Terrace, the top part of that looking at the 2 bungalows on the right-hand side. You can just about see the acoustic fence as well. And then obviously the properties on Gilder Terrace. And again, just a bit further around that access point, looking back at the site, the bungalows and the houses and that relationship that would be created if members are minded to approve the application. One of the things, obviously, with it being a topographically challenged site, is the need for retaining walls and gravel boards, and also logs as well in the garden. So, you can just about see it. So the pink on the plan is the gravel boards, which is where obviously the fence needs to be higher, and the gravel boards act as a retaining structure. Then you've got the sort of blue is either the sort of retaining wall without a fence or a retaining wall with a fence on top. And then the log rolls, these are the sort of dotted dotted orange lines in some of the gardens to help accommodate the site slope. I understand that there will be some ramps put in a certain place of that to allow for disabled access. And then just looking at the sections across the site, so just really to illustrate, obviously what I said earlier, that the east-west level changes are accommodated in the gardens. So you can see how the gardens sort of step down on the most topographically challenged parts of the site. One of the things that we asked for was an overshadowing study, which the findings are on page 74 of the committee report. But essentially, officers are satisfied following that study that even though some of those boundary fences will be higher in places, that those properties, those future occupiers will still benefit from a good level of amenity. The storey heights, as I said earlier, so the green is the 2.5 storey, which complies with the parameter plan. The blue is the 2 storey, and the orange yellow colour is the single storey, so it's obviously the bungalows and a couple of garages. And then you've got the street elevations. So this is all one street elevation going from this side to this side. It's too big for the plan, the page. So this is street elevation A. So this is those properties that would front onto the open space. And you've got a mixture of pallet materials, render, brick and weatherboarding, chimneys on a number of houses. Obviously it looks fairly contemporary in terms of its design. Street elevation B, again, is the same, where it can't be one long line, it has to be split up into 2 things. But essentially that is the spine road, so that obviously is a slightly different character. You've got the half brick, half render, and obviously you've got those 2.5 storey properties that I referred to earlier. And then street scene C, which is at the top part here. So that's one of the internal streets. You can see obviously where the houses are stepped to accommodate the change in levels. And street scene D, again a similar story. These are plots 1 to 14, or 4 to 14, so that's 4 and that's 14. Those properties are back on the Gilder Terrace, what they would look like. Now obviously the predominance of brick in this area rather than any sort of render. And then finally, in terms of the streetscape, so E, which is the top one, is sort of opposite plots 4 to 14 that we just looked at. Again, similar in character. You've got those corner turning units where obviously they're on the corners to make sure there's dual frontage. And then you've got the street in F, which is looking at the properties that back onto Sun Lido. They've incorporated some hipped roofs to be similar to the Gilder Terrace itself, which is hipped. We did also look at hipping a lot of the other houses on the development to be more akin to Gilder Terrace in terms of obviously local context, but with a step and a hip roof it doesn't really work visually. So we've just the relationship that's been created with the traditional pitched roof is what we've gone with, or what officers have decided is a better approach than having a stepped hipped roof. But obviously where we can, there has been hips included. And this is just the elevation of the flat over garage, just because that's not really shown on the street elevations, just what that would look like. Okay, so members will have seen the construction management plan that I circulated, or at least seen it in their inbox. Appreciate obviously it came quite late. Obviously just sent it when I received it. That was obviously following members' request at the forum. Just some of the, obviously I haven't gone through it in any detail, it's not for approval, but just some of the key points really. There'll be deliveries outside peak periods, construction access from the A120/A131, so obviously the main roads rather than going through Braintree town, measures to prevent or minimise dust, noise and vibration, the construction build phasing, and then obviously the compounds and the car park away from neighbours once the initial road network has been set up. So obviously that'll be the initial compound up here. Right, so on the home straight, so as I've said, we're looking this evening at the reserve matters for appearance, scale, layout and landscaping for the development of 120 dwellings, which is 84 market and 36 affordable. As I've said, works to the ground levels are necessary to navigate the site, but officers are satisfied with the current configuration, with the current levels, that there would not be a detrimental impact on neighbouring properties. And obviously, as you saw, we've asked the developer to go to some lengths to prove that. Obviously, it's been a challenging site since it's been submitted in December 22, and it's taken this long to get here through consistent negotiation with the developer. As I said, meets the garden size standards, parking standards, and nationally described space standards. Tree-lined streets are delivered in management company land. Even though it's not a mandatory requirement as part of this application, there would be over 10% biodiversity net gain delivered on the site. There would also be a solar panel, or solar panels, I should say, on each dwelling. One of the things to come back to members on was highways. They came back and had no objection following the enlargement of the turning head to size 3. And the lead local authority, the SUDS team, came back and also had no objection to what was submitted. I'll just say that the drainage information shows that what they proposed can drain, as in the site can drain, but the details aren't for approval at this stage because they're conditioned as part of the outline. But it does demonstrate the site can be attenuated to an acceptable level. Okay, so yeah, as you might have guessed, officers consider that the development would now achieve good design and layout. So the recommendation for members this evening is to approve, subject to the submission of a Section 73 application to vary the parameter plan attached to the outline consent, which is what I set out earlier, subject to the submission and determination of an application for the substation, subject to the completion of a suitable legal agreement to be attached to the Section 73 application or reserve matters, for refuse permission to allow our refuse vehicles to go on the site on those roads that aren't to be adopted, the built to adoptable standards, and the buffer planting management plan, which is what I said earlier, that outside bit of planting outside the red line. The management company plan has been updated to show that the acoustic fences would be within management company ownership. So if members are minded to approve, then I'd ask that we change the revision number for that plan. And they've also updated the plan which accompanied the biodiversity compensation and enhancement strategy just to reflect the latest layout, really. The details of lighting, we weren't able to secure to acceptable level prior to the committee. So we're suggesting a new condition 8, which takes wording from condition 11 of the outline, changed it slightly, but essentially requires a lighting scheme to be submitted. So they met the outline requirement by submitting a lighting scheme, but we want more time to make sure that the lighting scheme is appropriately designed for biodiversity. So that's why we're requesting that we add additional condition on. And I think that is it from me. Any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Matthew. Quite a piece of work. Members and Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Matt, for a very detailed and comprehensive presentation this evening. One of the better ones we've had on an application this size and scale. As members will know, about 2 years ago, this local authority was the first in Essex, I think, to pioneer the Planning Members Forum, whereby it brings together experience from both officers and the planning committee members, but also more importantly the invitation for local councillors to attend that committee or that forum too. And I can't understate the benefit that the local knowledge has given to this application, and thanks has to go to Mr Smith and his team at Chris Nicholson for engaging with us on numerous occasions to enable us to question a number of their pipeline plans and bring these through to the committee this evening. I think it just goes to show we've almost got a tale of two different applications, one from earlier this evening and the one that we've got now, and the benefits that this can bring to a planning application. I'm minded to obviously go alongside officers' recommendations this evening, given the depth and the scale and the detail that I think both parties have put into getting to this point. It's not been without its challenges, and the site is a very complex site and has needed that work to be able to get it to the point that it has now. Obviously, we know the history of this site. It was granted on appeal, so the planning principle has already been established, and we've done our part as a planning authority to work with the applicant to get to this point. And I think it's a very good scheme, if I'm honest. Notwithstanding what's happened in the past, it's within our gift to be able to work with a developer to deliver a good quality site in this area of Braintree towards Brain. I think the size and the scale of the development that's been proposed has been moderately reduced, so it does give those that want to move into that site a good place to live as well. And on the whole, I think there's some commendation to go to both officers for working with Chris Nicholson and getting it to this point, and to committee this evening. I do have one point, if that's okay, Matt, and that is on the lighting condition, bearing in mind that we haven't had that fully agreed tonight. Would you be able to share that with committee members in advance, once that's been put through to you, just so we've got sight of that, if that's okay?
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Yes, of course, we can circulate that to members once it's all been agreed. Would that be?
Well, apologies, Councillor Ritchie, is the request that comes before the committee for approval once we've got the full details of the lighting scheme, just so we're clear on the request.
So if it doesn't need to, then it's just a case of us having sight of the detailed plan once it comes through.
Fine. Yeah.
So circulate it via email?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, thank you, Councillor Ritchie, and to our officers for their answers. Anybody else? Councillor Bowes-Flint.
Thank you, Chairman. Much of what I was going to say has already been said now by Councillor Ritchie. Thank you very much. But I have to say that this is a fine example of the Members Forum working, but not just working for the developer, working for everybody, working for the residents that were objecting and this committee as well in not understanding. And I don't think I've actually seen a developer work with everybody like that before for an awful long while. It's a really unusual thing, but it's paid off. And I think that everyone should be congratulated in the professional way that they've carried out. All right, we all sitting around this table now most probably know every single inch of that site by now and know where it's going. But what a challenging site. A lot of developers wouldn't have even looked at that site. They would have walked away because they would have said, not doing it. So, pat on the back for sticking it out because it couldn't have been easy. It's also music to my ears to see bungalows being built, albeit it may be for the reason of the lay of the land on the site. However, the amount of times that we get criticised, asked, whatever, about bungalows, we know that they're expensive to build. We know that, and that is one of the biggest reasons developers don't like doing it. But it is a pleasure to see bungalows being developed on this site. So I won't take up any more time, Chairman, but actually I'm quite pleased to have been a part of this, to be fair, because it is a fine example of everybody working together and getting an outcome that suits everybody, because that site is something different with the land levels, and the congratulations should be given. So I'm quite happy to also support Officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bowes-Flint. Councillor Beavis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would concur with the points made. I think, yeah, in terms of the planning forums, had it not have happened on this site, I'd still feel quite uneasy about it, and a part of me still feels quite uneasy about it. I know the village quite well, and I remember walking around, as I said previously, when we had the large sort of scale development done when the factory closed, and so I'm really aware of those levels and the impact it's already had in that community, because it has had an impact. All of that said and done, I would also congratulate the developer. I think that the buffer, the mature trees, the engagement piece I thought was absolutely excellent. And I'm a great believer that form follows function, and I think now that's got to continue on, that those residents around there feel that that planning is being adhered to in terms of the movement of all that land and dust and all the other things that we've spoken about in the planning forum. So on those grounds, and for that information that was extended to us, I would also be happy to support the application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Beavis. Councillor Schweer.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll just follow up and join the general accolade tonight for this planning application so everybody can have a go. Yeah, just like to echo the sentiment there, but the planning forum, I think, has been very successful because not only of the enablement that's brought us effectively to this reserve matters tonight, but the fact that we've got PVs on all of the houses, we've got the EVs, we've got the bungalows, and I think that there's an awful lot to like about this, and we've mentioned, haven't we, about high quality, aspirational. It's the high quality and the aspirational that the residents moving into those houses are going to really appreciate. And let's just remember, we're here to help the residents and our aspirational way of life across Braintree District Council. And I think those high quality homes, although it's been quite a long process, has been great, and thanks to the developer who's gone along and listened to us as a planning forum, interpreted those plans with the landscape buffers. And what's really important with those is the connectivity too, that we're not isolating any of our flora and especially the fauna, that our animals and everything, that we're creating corridors for them to go around. So there's an awful lot to like. And the mature tree-lined streets, even with all of the potential earth movements proposed and the solutions that have come forward are good. But when you look at those graphics, it's, I think, with imagination, the combination of the landscaping that will be done, but especially the street trees, intermittently interspersed through that, actually you won't notice the contours in a few years' time, because the trees will grow and it will take away the horizon. So again, thanks to the officers, again for their foresight with the street-lined trees. There's a lot here. Overall, it's I think a high-quality design, and there is hopefully the result when we see it built. But I think the point that I really want to make is the process, that how successful, as Councillor Ricky mentioned at the beginning, that through the planning forum, how successful that has been on this occasion, and the difference to other planning applications that have come forward, because it goes to show what can be achieved, not just in planning terms, but actually in the quality of life that we're offering to residents. And that's what it's about. It's the quality of life that the residents will be in there, and that quality of life will depend on their health and help with their education and everything else. I could go on, but I think I better leave other people to other accolades. But thank you, and I'm going to support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Shuia. Right, members, is there anybody else who wishes to speak? In which case, there's a keenness in Councillor Ritchie's right arm. Can I call on you to propose something?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I would be more than happy to propose the officer's recommendations subject to the completion of the suitable legal agreement or section 73 and for the additional lighting condition as well, and your kindness to circulate that once it's been received. I so move, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. You've heard that proposal. Can we have a seconder, please? Councillor Bowers-Flint.
You beat me to it. So I'll second it. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much. Flint. Okay, you've the motion has been moved. All those in favour of officer's recommendation, please indicate by raising your hands. That is unanimous. Thank you very much, members. Thank you, everybody, for the positivity. Okay, thank you very much. Let us proceed to some smaller applications. 5C, application number 2400284FUL, Appledale, 1 Eastways, Witham. And we look to Chris Paggy to present on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So moving over to Witham, this is a change of use application. It's been reported to the Planning Committee given it falls within the major development category, but it is essentially a relatively straightforward application for a change of use. And essentially, within the description, the members will note effectively what's being sought is the inclusion of B2 and B8 uses. If I just run through the plans. Apologies, my laptop is now seized up. There we go. So the red line location plan, so we are on Eastways in Witham, so you've got the red line showing the existing building of the site on a corner, so it has 2 road frontages. We've got a few photos in a second, but an aerial shot showing the existing building, so you can see the parking area at the front, the loading area, and then the existing footprint of the building. A few photos of the frontage, around the sides, so quite a conventional industrial unit on an established industrial estate. So Yeah, the application before you, so there's no physical changes to the actual building itself or to the layout of the site essentially, but what is sought is a change of use. In terms of policy, the site is obviously located within development limits, so within the Whitton Town development boundary. It's also located within an employment policy area, and critically, the uses that are proposed accord with policy LPP3. So there are no objections from a planning policy perspective to this. The most substantive issue really with this application is actually the issue of parking. So we're obviously talking about an existing site here. If we were talking about a new development, proposals would need to accord with the council's adopted parking standards. And if those standards were to be applied, there would be a deficiency here. But given the established nature of the site, the uses proposed which accord with the designation, and the fact that we're also seeking a travel plan by condition, we feel that a relaxation of those standards in this particular case is desirable, and it will hopefully mean that the actual unit itself can be successfully let in the future, and give some flexibility to the owner to allow it to be let and to come forward for employment use without the need for a separate consent of planning permission to come forward. With apologies, the committee report makes reference to this, but the recommendation didn't include them. There was obviously consulted with the Council's Environmental Health Department, and they recommended a condition in relation to noise, fairly standard. So we're recommending a slight change to the recommendation with the inclusion of that additional condition in terms of noise, but subject to that additional condition, as the proposal complies with the use classes specified within LPP3, and given that it's a change of use only, officers consider the scheme to be acceptable, and as I said, we feel that there is a justification to allow for some flexibility for in terms of parking. So the application is recommended to grant planning permission, subject to the conditions specified in the published committee report, along with the additional condition in relation to noise. Happy to answer any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chris. Members? Councillor Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. I personally don't think there's a great deal to discuss on this one. It's pretty straightforward. It's change of use, as Chris has said, no physical alterations to the appearance, design of the building. It's on an established industrial estate. I actually really can't see any reason why we shouldn't go with officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Councillor Spray. Has anybody else anything to say on this one? Councillor Beavis.
I was going to concur with that. I looked at the papers this afternoon and I found it very, difficult to come up with something that one couldn't really, agree with the officers on. So I'd probably go further than Councillor Spray and move officers' recommendations on this one. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. We are, of course, still operating under Councillor Parker's edict, which is that we wait until everybody's had their say. But I suspect that is the case at this point. Any to the contrary? So, you've heard the report and the comments. Has anybody a desire to make a proposal?
Chairman, I'll second Councillor Bewis's moving approval.
Thank you very much. So that's movement of officer's recommendation by Councillor Beavis, seconded by Councillor Spray. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. Thank you very much, members. And we move swiftly on to the last application before us. That is item 5D on the agenda, application number 2400423HH. That is 32 Dorwoods Avenue in Braintree. This again will be presented to us by Chris Paggy.
Thank you, Chair. So last application, a householder application at Dorwoods Avenue in Braintree. Just for completeness, the application is being reported to Planning Committee as the applicant is a officer at Braintree District Council. So the application is for the erection of a single-storey front extension and also a reduction in size of the ground floor front window. Apologies. So just location plan to start off with. So the property is a detached property. Existing plans, so relatively straightforward layout and elevation plan of the existing property. And then the proposed block plan, so you can see the front addition here, which would facilitate the provision of a porch and a small downstairs toilet. And again, you can just see there the reduction in the window effectively to accommodate the size of the extension that's been proposed. Elevation plans which show the addition, and just for completeness, the side elevations as well. A couple of photos of the existing property, so fairly simple porch detail at the moment. Bit of context within the local area, so a number of properties, although a lot of the house types are similar, there have been various additions that have been made, and these next couple of photos just highlight that there are various additions that have been made in terms of porches, stroke front extensions within the local area. There was an earlier application which was withdrawn, and it's been resubmitted, which has just reduced the size and scale of it down slightly. And on that basis, officers were comfortable that in terms of its design and appearance, that it was acceptable, and given the character and the additions that have been made to other existing properties, that it wouldn't appear out of keeping. Clearly, the proposal would have no impact in terms of neighbouring amenity, in terms of overshadowing or in terms of loss of privacy. It doesn't affect the existing parking arrangements at the property, so on that basis is considered the proposal is acceptable, and again the recommendation from officers is to grant planning permission subject to the conditions set out in the published committee report. Happy to answer any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chris. Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief, so we know that this is before us this evening by virtue of the fact that the applicant is an employee of this council, and for probity and transparency we always bring them to this committee for a decision. As per the presentation from Chris this evening, it's well within size and scale for what looks to be very similar applications down that whole road, either to the front or to the side of the properties, just to enhance the outlook, or to add an additional cosmetic view from the applicant. So I see no reason to go against officers' recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Ritchie.
Happy to propose officers' recommendations, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So the movement of officer recommendation has been proposed by Councillor Ritchie, seconded by Councillor Bowers-Flint. All those in favour, please indicate by raising your hand. Thank you. That again is unanimous. Thank you, members. That is the last of the applications before us this evening. We have no urgent business or matters under item 7. Therefore, at 22:09, I close this meeting of Braintree District Council Planning Committee. Thank you.